Okay. Afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for coming back. To those who have come back, we have had a slight shift in the program. So the MDDA Finance led by the CFO, Mr. Yasin Asmal, will be presenting, and then followed by MDDA Legal. So I'll then hand over to the CFO to start his presentation.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Program Director Letabo. Colleagues, I'm thrown into the graveyard shift, as they call it. I hope I'm audible. But anyways, I'm going to try and be as quick as possible and not bore you as much as possible. Anyway, with regard to the MDDA project finances and financial reporting, my screen is shared, my document is up and running. I hope everyone can see it. The mandate, I think we've spoken to you many times already. I mean, our mandate comes from the constitutional mandate and the Constitution of South Africa. In terms of our act, it determines what we do and who we support and how we support, and the type of situations where we get involved and assist. With regard to now getting into the meat of finance, when we talk to disbursements, our disbursements come specifically from the Schedule of Particulars. The SOP, as we call it, the SOP contains the board decision, the summary, the objectives of the project outcomes, the approved budget, the disbursement profile, the reporting requirements, and special conditions. That is summarizing what you'll find in the Schedule of Particulars. I'm going to change my screen for a second. I'm going to grab a Schedule of Particulars to give you an example of what it looks like so one can see it. Give me a sec. It's in PDF document. I hope it's up and running. This is a typical example of what the Schedule of Particulars looks like. As I've said, it is your summary of approval in terms of the decision from the board, the resolution number, if that's in terms of our internal processes, the project objective of what the project is to do, where it's about, where it's based, the outcome of what we expect in terms of from the project, and then going to the detail, it gives the detail of the budget. It breaks down the budget in terms of what the money has been given for. For example, under project administration, it's given for bank fees, audit fees, insurance. These are just examples. When you are given equipment, what type of equipment you're given money for, capital expenditure, what the money is for, etc. And that is broken down. It's further broken down in terms of your reporting timelines. When do you report? What is expected for reporting in terms of the reporting frameworks? And additional documentation with conditions, just to summarize. And this document is obviously signed. Important to know, this document is signed with your contract, so that one is clear when they sign the contract. This document is there with the contract. I'm opening back the presentation. Technology is letting me down. There we go. Colleagues, please apologize. I'm just having just a small technical difficulty here. Not showing. Colleagues, I'll be with you in a sec. I'm sorry about this. Where's my... I'm back on the schedule of particulars. When we go to the next tranche, this is the most important, not the most important, but one of the most important aspects. Once you've been approved for support, and the first tranche, it needs to be disbursed to you, there's the following requirements that we require. One, as I spoke to, that legal will talk through as we go through, is the signing of a funding agreement. Legal will take you through what's incorporated in the document. The entity maintenance form, it's a bank stand form that indicates where you bank, with who you bank. A banking detail confirmation letter, certified copies of IDs of all bank signatories, a tax certificate of good standing. Obviously, it could be from your tax clearance certificate, it could be your certificate from CSD, it could be your SARS PIN. The one important thing and one aspect that I do recommend is that although CSD is not a requirement for MDRA support, we encourage you to be registered on CSD and to be compliant at all times. That would allow you to ensure that when there is work that government are going to be issuing and work that government are procuring, especially from organs of state, they require that one is compliant and on CSD. The subsequent tranches. The subsequent tranches now will happen once you've received your first tranche, and I'm going to get into the detail now of what these documents look like. We require from you, after your first tranche, to provide us with a tranche expenditure narrative report. Then with that, your expenditure document should include documentations like your quotations, your supporting documents, the bank statement for the period reported. So, for example, if your period is for 3 months, we require to see the 3 months bank statements and how the money was spent in that period. Should there be deviations or savings within this process, you should have requested in writing to the MDRA before the spending is made, and then you would, if the approval is given to you for your deviations of savings, then you would be allowed to use that money for the purpose that you are requesting to. Or at the end of the process or during the process, audited reviewed financial statements, an audit review report, any other information that's required by the grantor. We may request information going through the process that to ascertain certain information where we are, and we request it. And another very important thing is a valid broadcasting license, colleagues. That's something that we find that the process starts running and the broadcasting license sometimes expires, and the process of that delays you from receiving your next tranche. I'm going to show you an example of what the narrative report looks like and what the tranche report looks like. So, colleagues, I hope my screen is big enough. This is an example of the interim report or your narrative report. It has specific paragraphs, specific details. Within this grade area outlined here, it details what exactly is required when you present this report. The administrator of the report, the administrator would then include information of what you've achieved for the period, how you've spent the money, and what you've done. And it gives you information. It also, as we say here, your financial report meeting the requirements for the MDRA's next tranche. The MDRA requests you to complete the expenditure report format, which you will find in the last page of this progress report. This expenditure report is supported by the Excel document, which I'll be showing to you next. As we say, after receiving this report from you, the MDRA will carry out a monitoring field visit to visit your project to see the progress you've made. This project is a template that we utilize to evaluate. The headings are standard. It's required for you to populate the information within these headings so that one can get a greater understanding of what's transpired during this period of tranche that was given to the project, and for one to understand what is going on and what is your current challenges and what have we achieved and not achieved, etc., and how the money has been spent. This is a standard template that is provided to you when you are reporting. Colleagues, I'm going to show you now the narrative report, the narrative report being the detailed expenditure report. When you receive funding from the MDRA, we send you this expenditure report. Within the expenditure report, it has got a number of instructions in terms of those and how you prepare this document. You will notice that on the first document, the first tab, it says instructions. It tells you exactly what needs to be done, how it needs to be done. It's fairly simple. It just takes a little bit of reading and understanding. And a lot of the information within this document is linked, so you don't have to populate it twice and thrice. It's once you populate it, it then pulls through and the information correlates. So in the first tab, it says to you, please select the correct sheet. So we are reporting on summary of detail payment 1. I've kept an example of detail payment 1 here, so we select detail payment 1. We'll go within detail payment 1. It requires for us, the first step says, please enter the date that the funds at MTD were received within this document. I've put my birth date, for example, and there was an amount paid of 162,000 paid. These you populate, and it's clear from the instructions, it's indicated in pink. Thereafter, it says, please capture each invoice in the appropriate areas marked in blue. Please note that at the top of each area marked in blue is the heading. The heading that we refer to is the heading here as the example that we're using. It's called backup generator. You would notice that the backup generator is actually pulling through from line 16, 17, 18, 19 respectively. So once you've populated the detail in line 16 and the amount that you received in your budget that is pulling through directly from your SOP, it will then indicate the amounts within here. So we'll use the first one, backup generator. Backup generator's detail pulls through from line 16. You managed to procure this on the 22nd of on the 8th of February 2021. You have an invoice number. This is the supplier that you procured it from. What was the description? You procured a generator. This was the cost of the generator. You will notice that your budget for this generator was 56,000. That is pulling through into this line over here, and that's coming from a line B16. And your actual, which is actually at the bottom of this document. You don't need to do any formulas, any adding, etc. The document is formulated already. The templates are in place. It will pull through already. I'll show you an example why I say that. If you look in the next line, the next category is printer and equipment. Under printer and equipment, we say we've procured for 33,580. When I delete that amount, you'll notice in line 17, the amount got deleted automatically. So in the summary sheet, it says that no money was spent. So this will help you when you understand this in more detail as to how it operates, colleagues. Colleagues, I will take questions from you. I'll just go further the instructions just quickly. If there's any other 5, please remember to save before you close the sheet so your work is always up to date. So what will happen is that if you don't save, or unless you put auto save on the document, you could have done all the work and you don't capture it and you have to redo the work. When sending the document to the MDA, this is is the most critical part. Please ensure that you send all the supporting documents back. So your invoices, your receipts, your bank statements, so that one can reconcile exactly what has happened. And your project manager is always available to assist you with regard to this. No, I'm at I got 3 more slides, sir. No problem. With regard to write-backs, and I think, colleagues, this is an important section that we do detail quickly. In terms of our act, it empowers the board to terminate support for projects within certain circumstances, projects not achieving their objectives, the non-adherence to MDA funding agreements, financial mismanagement and misappropriation, unresolved conflicts, failure to submit information, and resolutions by projects governing body to close projects. Process for withdrawals. This is the process that will be followed. The disbursement is suspended, written communication by the MDA. The project needs to respond within a certain amount of days. We'll visit the sites. Once the MDA representative meets the project to establish where we are, the MDA board would approve the write back once the report is presented to the board and the disbursements are stopped. I've gone into the financial report already to try and mitigate and save some time. But as I've said, the objective of the financial report is to how the money has been used from the MDA, to provide the necessary support and documentations of how the money was spent, and to highlight the project's financial health. So we can see exactly what is the status of the project, what the money that was received, and where we are. The contents of the financial report, as I've said in my presentation of the financial report, it talks to the budget amounts from your SOP, the expenditure amount that was as per the bank statement and invoices, and the variance, the difference between the budget and actual. The importance of the expenditure amounts per bank statements and invoice, colleagues, is that when we transfer money, we transfer it into a separate bank account that you are transacting using the MDA money. One would be able to establish exactly how much was spent of the MDA money, what it was spent for, and was it in line with the SOP that is tabled in line number 1. The variance would indicate whether we've spent more than the budget or less than the budget. And as I've spoken to previously, if there is variances, that should have been approved by the MDA before one is spent. Program Director, I tried to be as succinct as possible. I am completed with my presentation. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that was quite fast. Colleagues, I'll open the floor to questions. I see if we can just make me host again so that I'm able to take questions.
Program Director, you MDDA?
Yeah.
Okay. I think I've made you host. Please confirm.
Yeah, thanks.
Pleasure.
Okay. Kobus, I see your hand is up.
To unmute. Okay. Can you hear me, sir?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Thank you, sir. I just want to ask, we received funding, it was in 2016 and 2017, and we completed our documents, we handed in, and there was 1 or 2 questions or whatever they actually asked from us, but we handed in everything, and up to now there was a thing that they said I didn't hand in it at time, but we definitely handed in all the documentation. So I just want to know, and we never applied again for funding. I just want to ask, can we again apply for funding? I'm not sure what was the situation that time, but there was no how can I put it? There was no things that we spend the money or something that we didn't report to. Everything was in line according to what the MDDA wanted from us. But till now, I just want to know if can we again apply, and when can we apply for a second time?
Thanks, Kobus. Program Director, if I can respond to that.
Okay.
Thanks. Thank you, Kobus, for the question. In terms of earlier on when Mr. Kashi was presenting, he did indicate that the current year's call for funding has expired. So it will be in the next financial year where you would be able to apply for funding. I'm not sure the details of your project, etc., and whether it was written back or not at this stage. But I think you should be able to, I mean, unless there were specific reasons, which I don't have the specific answers to that question now, but maybe I should keep it to the application for call for funding at this stage, is that you can apply, or you should be able to apply in the next year, unless there were specific reasons where the project was written back, which would have an impact on whether you would be able to apply or not. So, sorry, Kobus, I missed that. You want to know to who? To who?
Oh, sorry, must I just apply as normal again, or who can I contact?
Yeah, the call for applications will be sent out. We'll do probably in the next couple of months, going into the next financial year, and then you would apply through the online application process that we've tried implementing over the last 2 years.
Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, any more questions? Okay. We usually get a lot of questions for finance. So, all right.
Unless Program Director, you want to ask a question?
No, I'm good, thanks. Samusi, I see your hand is up.
Thank you very much. May I proceed?
Yes, you can.
Yes, Bretlimus again from Kurara. Yeah, I just want to ask the gentleman there in terms of funding. Let's make an example. You've applied for an OB equipment, and when you applied for 250,000 for that equipment. MDDA decide now that they will only fund you for 100,000 out of the 250,000 that you applied for. And now it comes to the point of reporting whereby, because the equipments that you wanted to buy, they cost 250, they've only funded you for 100,000. You are unable to buy those equipment, and you are unable to raise the other 150 for it to be 150. Now, in such a way, what do we do? Because we still, now MDDA will say, you need to report back, and you report back and say, here's the 60,000. I applied for 250, you fund me for 100. The equipment that I want is this much. I did not buy the equipment because the equipment that we need cost this much. What do we do there now? Do we return the money to MDDA because we are unable to raise the balance to buy the equipment? Or what do we do in such a situation?
Thanks, Musi, for asking me such a difficult question. Musi, in terms of our application process and our SOP process, if you are given money for a certain purpose, the money is meant to be spent in that purpose. If the money is going to be used for something else, as I've indicated previously, we will need to go through a process where we apply for deviation or savings, etc. And that requires a letter to be sent to the MDDA in terms of requiring and justifying why the money is going to be spent differently and the reason for it as to why it will be spent. I think also with regard to some of the equipment when we do provide support, we try and benchmark in terms of benchmark studies that we've done in terms of what is the cost for certain equipment, and on that basis we will then give certain amounts of money. But like you said, your example is that if you plan to spend 250 and you are unable to, I think the best process then is to do an application to the MDDA to explain your variation and how you would want to use the money differently.
Thank you very much. Just as a follow-up, you don't want to use the money for anything else, but strictly you want to use the money for the purpose that was meant for. Remember, when we do applications, we first move around 6, 7, 8, 10 suppliers and see prices to say, when I apply, I know that roughly this 10 particular suppliers for this particular product that I need, it costs this much. And you apply for that particular amount, and still you don't want to deviate or use the money for anything else, but you strictly wanted to use it for the same purpose. What do we do now? Because you are funded for less than what you apply for. All that I want to know, do you return the money back to MDDA because you cannot procure what you needed to procure? And upon that, you don't want to use the money for anything else. You strictly want to use it for that particular purpose. For example, we applied for funding, 150,000 for a backup generator. We were funded 60,000 for the backup generator. The backup generator now, the size that we need in the market, costs about, including installation, about 149, 150. So we're now sitting with the 60,000 and say, the only thing that we can do is to say to MDDA, we will move this to tranche 2 while we still trying to raise the balance. Where can we get the balance? But based on operations and based what you come in, you see probably it's going to take you another 6 months or 7 months to raise whatever the balance that is there. You see. So the question that I'm asking, what do we do now? Do we now say, MDDA, we could not purchase the equipment, and because we can't afford it, we return the money to you.
Thanks, Musi. I think in that case, as I've said, we've got an SOP, which is signed at the beginning. The SOP would have indicated the amount. In the situation like that, I think legal, he just walked in and walked out. I would have asked for him to help me with the answer. But I would think that the best would be to say that we are unable to spend this money on the item that was recommended, and we're going to return this portion of the money. But I think legal would be best to answer that question in more detail in a situation like that.
Thank you.
Any more questions, colleagues? Okay. Thank you very much, CFO. Please share your presentation pack with me so that I can distribute.
Will do. I'll send it to you in the next few minutes. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you for your time, and all the best for the rest of the day.
Thanks. Colleagues, we will now cross over to
I almost said morning, but I think thanks for. All right. Sure, thanks. Looks like it's a very serious and hectic workshop. I hope I'm just going to be a bit short and crisp for you colleagues. I think with some of you we have met, with some we haven't. And those of you who don't know me, my name is David Moreira. I am from the Legal and Compliance Unit. I am responsible for the drafting and review of all legal contracts here at the MDDA. I am also participating in the project and legal oversight committees around how we consider issues that deal with deviation submissions, saving submissions, and any other thing that will relate to the contract particular. But my purpose for today is to, I think, take you colleagues through another somewhat short workshop over how the grant agreement, what are the requirements from the grant agreement. My processes, if you've ever attended a grantee orientation workshop, wherein I would have been a presenter there, you would know that I like my sessions to be greatly engaged because the contract has been drafted and I know how it operates. I've contracted you, but I usually like to deal with actual situations which necessitate a proper interpretation of the contract. The contract, as you have it, it's probably a 38 or 40 page contract. But all those 40 pages read together, or they relate to one another. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to run through my slides. They're not as a lot, and I'm not going to read my slides. I'm going to reflect my slides, and I'm also going to tell you what those slides refer to and which part of the contract they relate to. I managed to sit through the CFO's presentation around how finances, and I had a question relating to what happens in the event of a lower amount that is approved for an item, and you want to then refer the issue to the next tranche, or you then want to then have an option to return the funds back to the MDDA. We'll deal with the questions at that time, but I think let's get on to my presentation. So what we'll talk about is a mere short intro that I've done with you. I'm going to tell you about the obligations of the grantee, which is the radio station, alternatively the paper. I'm going to tell you about the grant period. I'll tell you about deviations and savings. I'll tell you about the separate banking account of the MDDA. Also take you through procurement, and I'll take you through the breach of contract and being placed on the non-compliance register. This is something greatly new, which the current board has just recently then started to implement. I'll also tell you about project legal management. I'll give you some tips, and we may probably get into governance. But on the introduction, most of the contractings that we have done since my joining the entity, alternatively post 2018, let's talk about 2019, you'd see that all contracting would have been done by the Legal and Compliance Office, and particularly in your sessions, we would request the following. We'd request that the board of directors, alternatively members of the corporation, alternatively trustees of the trust, alternatively directors of an NPC or a PTY attend the contracting process. Any contract, and this is information that is not on this slide, but this is information that I'm giving. Any contract can only be legally binding if concluded by the parties with the necessary legal capacity. What that means is this: is that for a contract to be binding, you need to be of full legal capacity. When we're talking about directors of a company, when we're talking about full legal capacity, we're talking about the executive authority that directs measures around the company. For the MDDA, you'll see previously the grant agreements were signed by the CEO. Post 2019, the contracts were then signed by the board chairperson. If you consider the MDDA Act, subsection 2, it says the following. It says the MDDA shall act through its board. if you consider section 7, it says the following. It says the board of the MDDA will delegate all its powers. It may delegate all its powers except for the power to approve grants. So that's why you see that the current grant agreements are signed by the board chairperson. But I want to take you through this. The reason why you see we're very pedantic around making sure that the executive authority of your project participates in the contracting process is because we want to make sure that the contracting parties that we contract with are the legitimate parties to the contract. Over a period, we have, and I will not necessarily mention names, we have found ourselves in instances where post-contracting, we then get various emails around, the persons that came to the contracting were not the legitimate ones, the persons that came to the contracting have now been dismissed, there's a new board. So what we've tried to do is that we want to then exercise and protect the integrity of your governance structures in your entity. The second thing that you see on the slide speaks about the management of the business affairs. The reason why we want the board of directors to be present is because we understand the following, that a company is managed, or an entity, let's talk about entity, an entity is managed from its executive authority. So be it a trust, it's managed by its board of trustees. Be it a company, it's managed by its board of directors. Be it an NPO, it's managed by its board of directors. So that process does not change. Even the MDDA, our processes, if you look at the grant agreement, it will still tell you your grant would have been approved by a resolution of the board of directors. So any decision from there on is taken by the board. So one of the issues that we also try and highlight is that directors are entrusted by the shareholders, stakeholders, but in this instance, because you receive a grant following an application in terms of the MDDA's Act, in collaboration with all other acts that impair on you, we want to contract with the relative executive bodies so that when we hold the entities liable in terms of that slide I told you about that talks about place on a non-compliance register. We then are able to enforce the following sections. Section 76 and Section 77 of the Companies Act speak about powers of the board of directors and what will happen to the board of directors in the event they exercise their powers in a manner that is found to be against their fiduciary duties or in bad faith. Section 23 of the NPO Act speaks about what will happen to a board of directors of a NPO in the event they exercise their powers mala fide. So mala fide basically means in bad faith. So what we're trying to do is that to protect the locus standi of all parties, the legal capacity of all parties before a contract is then concluded. But like I said, your grant agreement will be a huge document which will have all this legal jargon. But during the contracting process, I always try and emphasize the following, that in as much as we do the contracting, and I do the contracting, I take you through the day-to-day management of the grant, there is an added requirement on all board members. And I know I'm probably maybe speaking to colleagues at an operational level, or maybe speaking to colleagues at a board level. But as the executive authority on operational level, it's your duty as well to make sure that you hold your board to account. It's gone are the days where you find people only interested in calling themselves board members, going around the community telling people that they're board members, but they're doing nothing. Board members have got an obligation to lobby for funds. They've got an obligation to build the radio station. They've got an obligation to hold the executive accountable. So it's not just this thing of sitting on boards and then assuming I'm a board member, I'm okay. So as a station manager, as a publisher, you have an added obligation to make sure that your board remains functional. Your board remains participative in all happenings of the radio station. The next slide speaks about obligations of the grantee. Colleagues, these obligations here would appear in page 11 or 12. I don't have the grant agreement with me. It appear in page 11 or 12 of your grant agreement. And I've tried to put the gist of what we usually find as critical clauses in the grant agreement on this particular slide. And I still implore you to still consider your grant agreement, particularly because of this, the second, third slide that I'm going to take you through. One of the most critical documents that goes with the grant agreement is that document that is called the Schedule of Particulars. I think the CFO is calling it an SOP, and I think the colleagues in projects were also referring to it as the SOP. But that document is really critical in the following sense, is that the items to which you would have been approved for are dictated in that contract. Over the years, I get asked this question when I then do contracting. I get asked the following, that, no, but David, we submitted an application and these are the things that we said we need, but you are coming to us with a contract that does not have the things that we applied for. And I say to them, and I always say the following, I say, the processes have changed. Previously, you would apply for ABC and you would get approved ABC. But over the time, when boards change, strategy changes, the executive comes in, implementing methods are changed, there is a new legal team, there is a new implementing team, then people look at things differently. Now there are processes that happen which are called site visits, or site evaluation visits, following your application to go and check if whether the items that you applied for, do you really need them? I can confirm with you, and you know each other, colleagues, that there are certain radio stations where you visit and you find 5 equipments, what do you call this? Studio equipments. They've got 5 studios. And when you ask, only 2 are working. And when you then reevaluate it, because they've been applying over the years, asking for the same thing. So which this then impairs on the overall mandate of the MDD around achieving diversity and making sure that there's radio stations in various districts and all those things. But like I'm not going to take you through that. But eventually what I'm trying to get at is this. Is that specific item called the Schedule of Particulars is not drafted in line. Is not drafted in line with your principal application, which you would have submitted during the call of applications. Is drafted in consideration of our application, the site visit report, together with the submissions that the board makes. So remember, when the board gets given an approval allocation to say, this year we have got 10 rands to approve to broadcast radio stations. This year we've got 13 rands to approve towards the print and digital media projects. What they need to do is that they need to look at their quota for that period to say, we're going to approve this number of radio stations, these are our target areas, this is what we want to do, and this is how we're going to spread the budget. Because they do not want to give David the whole budget, because they've then identified that if you give David the whole budget, what then, how do we then meet our quota? But the question that I get asked around, why is the SOP not reflective of our application? Is because of those things, colleagues. But the SOP is referred to in your contract as Annexure A. If you go through your contract, where it always refers to Annexure A, Annexure A, Annexure A, it refers to this document as the Schedule of Particulars. And this Schedule of Particulars is very important because clause number 6 of the agreement, its heading there says obligations of the grantee. When you go to clause number 6.1.1, it says the following. I don't remember the specific word, but it says you'll use the funds strictly, you'll use the funds solely and exclusively or strictly in terms of the approved budget. But the approved budget is what? Is that Schedule of Particulars. If you go on that Schedule of Particulars, there is, the first page dictates how the entity that has been approved. The second page dictates the budget that was requested. The third page will request the budget approved. And then the third table would dictate how that budget is going to be utilized. And clause 6.1 says the following. It says you'll utilize your budget approved. If you've been approved 1 million rands, you'll utilize the 1 million rands in terms of that approved budget. On a studio, production studio, a generator, 2 laptops, whatever. It will tell you that. It will also probably tell you the quantity of the number of laptops. Alternatively, it will be silent on those. But it will, when it says 2, that's the minimum you can buy. In the event where you can buy more, you buy more. And it also says to you, you must utilize the budget within the funding period. Today, for example, let me give an example. Today, for example, I was given a report of projects that were then approved, and I see your hands. I'll take questions at the end of my presentation. I apologize. I was given a report that reflects projects that were recommended for write-backs, or alternatively to cancel their contracts. And I see these contracts emanate or come from 2018. And I'm asking, but the funding period was for this period. How is it that this contract is within the 4th year contract? They say, no, it's old approved projects and all those. That's why we're terminating them. So if you look at the SOP, on that page that dictates how the items will be utilized, it has a clause there where it will say to you, you'll utilize 200,000 rands from August until October. You'll utilize 100 rands from this period till that period. And all those sub-clauses are very important. And the principal clause, which is very important, would appear on clause number 4 of your contract. It's written commencement and duration. It will tell you how long your contract has been approved for and for how many tranches you're going to be approved for. The other important obligation is the following, is that in the event, and I think this is one of the things that I've seen most of the colleagues, and I'm saying colleagues, I'm talking about grantees, most of our colleagues in the sector, they do. In the event where they are affected by circumstances beyond their control, they do not timeously inform the grantor and request an extension of their contract, alternatively a suspension of their contract, so that they don't fall out of time. For example, let me give you an example. Radio David gets given a 12-month contract to implement the grant. On the 4th month, a transmitter blows. A transmitter blows, which means they are not on air. Alternatively, let's use this analogy. When these riots happened, let's say the riots took a month in your area. The whole month you were not able to work. That circumstance has got a great impediment on you implementing the grant. What you then need to do is you need to write to the grantor and say, look, you've given me 4 months, but my 4 months was cut short by a superseding event in between the contract. What I request you to give me an extension. Alternatively, allow me to report to report for the 3 months and not report for the 3rd month because of these issues. They keep quiet. When it comes to reporting period, then they want to come and then engage with the grantor. At that point, it becomes difficult for one to understand any reason that will have probably been put forward, because the contract specifically says, upon coming into knowledge of the circumstance, you are required to timeously tell the grantor. Another issue is the following. Clause 6.1.5 says the following. It says, if in the implementation of your grant, you've been approved 3 laptops, and these were supposed to come in the 2nd tranche. I'm giving you an example. And during your 1st tranche implementation, you get a good Samaritan, a donor who comes and donates laptops. It basically then means you no longer require the 2 laptops in the 2nd tranche. As opposed to you utilizing the funds for the laptops for any other thing. The contract says the following. It says you must write to the MDDA and request for a deviation to change that specific item, to move it from those specific funds, to move them from an allocation of those laptops to maybe an allocation to repair a transmitter, or to add it to administration costs, or to pay whatever item that you deem necessary. And the contract says the following. It says you must ask or receive prior written approval. It does not say deviate with the funds and then ask for and ask for permission. It says ask for prior written approval. So you'll write to your project coordinator and say, these are the circumstances we're in. We no longer require this money for the laptops as we've been given contracts. We require to utilize the funds for another item. All those deviations go through a process as well. They get considered from operational level. They get considered from a management level. They go to the executive. Alternatively, if they fall within the threshold of the CEO that gets to either approve, decline, or approve with a condition. If they go beyond the threshold of the CEO, they're then referred to the board for consideration. One of the other important clauses is that giving access to the MDDA in respect of information or to your premises. We've seen it that colleagues have a tendency of refusing to grant access to bank statements and all those things. And clause number 8 of the MDDA grant agreement says the following. The heading of that is separate bank account. We'll deal with it as we further go down. It says you will give us access to those bank accounts. If you don't, we have the liberty to access those bank accounts records on our own. And in the contract, you are giving us permission to do that. All right, I'm going to move from the slide because what I've engaged you is basically what this specific slide deals with. But like I said, clause number 6, when I contract with colleagues, I always call it the master clause. Because clause number 6, that's where you either go wrong or you either go right. If you see yourself not engaging with clause number 6 in your contract, you're in the wrong. It's the same way as you see yourself going over a few weeks, a week or two without engaging with your project coordinator. Because there is never a moment where you can assume your implementation of your grant is perfect. This is what I was talking about when I was saying to you, there is a clause on the contract that speaks to the duration. So you, like I said, you get approved a 12-month agreement, alternatively a 6-month, depending on what you've been approved for. And then the contract will also tell you how many tranches you've been approved. But one of the most important critical things is the following. Clause number 7 of the grant agreement says this. It says obligations of the grantor, which is the MDDA. That clause is actually like a three-line clause. It says the following. The MDDA will pay your grant only on condition that you are compliant. Compliant with what? With the grant agreement together with its SOP. And its SOP will tell you the following. Before you receive your first tranche, you must have submitted supporting documents for you to receive the first grant. For you to receive the second tranche, you must have properly accounted for the first tranche and provided supporting documents for that. And your failure for you to utilize the funds or to account in time will result in a breach of agreement, of the grant agreement, which then invokes clause number 20 of the grant agreement. And clause number 20 says the following. It says, in the event a grantee breaches any provision of this agreement, 4 things may happen. They may decide to withhold your grant. They may decide to claim a repayment of the funds disbursed. They may terminate your grant agreement. Alternatively, they may force you to comply. So the disbursement profile is that schedule of particulars which appears on that Annexure A that we're talking about. And the period in which tranches must be utilized and items approved for the use appears also on those on that SOP. Deviations is what I was talking about. And over time, this is how you structure your grant. I think with the current recently approved colleagues, what they had the joy of was the time before they received their first tranche and the time in which we did the contracting and the grant orientation. And this is how it works. And let me give you an example about one of the projects that I then contracted. It's a project in Limpopo. After I contracted them, what they then did is that they wrote to the legal unit asking for advice on how to set up a grant implementation committee. They then set up a grant implementation committee which comprised of members of the board and members of the executive. And what it then did is that after they then considered their principal application, and they then considered our grant agreement with our SOP. What they then did is this. They submitted one application for deviation even before they received the funds. What they then did is that they understood that this is what they've been approved for, and this is what is pressing in the implementation of their grant, and what is it that they would want to move to the second tranche and what should come to the first tranche. But the only thing they failed at is in the current approved is the board says no, broadcast equipment will come in the second tranche. Because what the board has identified is that people apply for broadcast equipment and other auxiliary items, and then once they've got the equipment, they no longer care about the issues. So what the board has done now is that broadcast equipment comes in the second on the last tranche. So to go back to my scenario about this project I was telling you about, they then submitted their deviation request, which was then approved. But what they had done is the following, is that they were approved for a number of desktop computers and a number of laptops. What they then did is that they applied for a deviation to combine the two items, to buy a number of desktop computers, and then they wanted to set up a hub, and they then in the deviation utilize the balance of that of that specific item to fund their hub. So I think the question was around, we had approved, we got approved a certain amount for a generator. The amount was insufficient. We did not have money to do the others. So this is where clause number 6.1.5 read together with clause number 10.6 of the agreement say the following. It says, in your consideration of these things, you can create yourself savings. You can also deviate. Let me explain the item on savings. Broadcast equipment that gets approved, you get approved almost around 1.7 million rands, if not 1.6. And you are then required to go out on a tender process as a grantee to go and search for quotations, negotiate with your service providers and all those things. Over a period, I've seen when I'm doing broadcast equipment installation agreements that the approved equipment amount is less than the amount that the MDDA would have approved. So you get approved 1.7 and your contract with the service provider becomes 1.56, which means you've got an odd 100 and something thousand rands remaining. That amount in terms of the grant agreement is defined there in clause 1.1.7 is the word savings. The grant agreement defines the word savings in the following. I'm not reading it word for word. It's because I know these things. It says, savings is defined as an amount outstanding or remaining following a negotiated purchase of an item or a service. So because you would have negotiated with your service provider, Debates or PTY Ltd, the 100 and something thousand rands is defined as a savings. Clause 10.6 of the agreement says the following. It says, in the event a grantee accrues savings following a negotiation of a service or the negotiation of an equipment, the grantee must then write to the MDDA to request permission to deviate those savings and allocate them to another product. So the reason why that three-code system is very important is to enable you to go and try and cut down on your costings. I've already explained to you on how you deal with deviations. With the current broadcast colleagues, with the current digital and print media colleagues, you'll find that attached to your grant agreement, there is a deviation form already annexed to it. And it's self-explanatory. When you read it there, it says to you, what is it that you want to deviate on, what are your reasons, and what do you require to use the funds for. That process usually takes between 1 and 5 days, depending on how accessible the executive is, but it has never taken more than 2 weeks from my recollection. The separate bank account I've already explained. You need to open a separate bank account. The separate bank account needs to only host funds from the MDDA. You find that people want to then put money from stokvels, want to put money from, utilize the funds, the MDDA account, specifically for the MDDA grant. What we also recommend is that there must also be a minimum of at least 2 office bearers authorized as signatories to the bank account. Because we found that over a period that grantees have a way of having governance issues, and then the account is siphoned, there's maladministration, and there's all those things. So when you've got a segmented approach on how you manage your account, it becomes easier. With other radio stations or with other print and digital media projects that I've contracted, I've seen an effective way of managing it in the following sense, that they get somebody from an operational level, and they get somebody as well from the board level. I think they get 2 people. But what they then do is that they have the finance manager at projects, at the project at operational level being the one who loads the payments, the station manager vets those payments together with the invoices submitted, and then somebody at board level, I think it's the treasurer or the chairperson, then releases the payment. But that's people think it's a very tedious process of how to manage your funds. But that's the most effective and proper way of managing your processes, because you will never have a gap in between where you pay a wrong service provider or where you pay a wrong amount. And the other issue is the following, is that we have realized that colleagues like having cards. I've always asked that if the contract of the MDDA says you can only utilize the funds through an electronic transfer or EFT, why do you have a card? Because that card will force you to do cash withdrawals, which are strictly forbidden in the contract. The MDDA does not agree to cash withdrawals. We do not agree to cash withdrawals. Even an EFT, what you call not an EFT, an e-wallet is a cash withdrawal. Because if you go to the definition of an e-wallet, it says it's an instant, easy, and affordable money transfer service. That money, if you send yourself and send somebody an e-wallet, when you go back to your bank statement, it's the numbers that reflect on your bank statement. When you are doing a collation of your report at the end of the month or at the remainder of your tranche, there is no way that a project coordinator, together with the finance unit, will be able to allocate that number to a specific item approved on the schedule of particulars, which is the SOP. So, colleagues, cash withdrawals are not allowed. Checks are very, in fact, banks don't longer do checks, unless if you've got a bank that still issues out checks. But checks are also not allowed because they're very admin taxing. So they take too much on your bank costs. And if you look at it, you only get approved a small amount on bank costs. The other issue is access to the separate bank account. Of recent, we're celebrating one recent judgment here at the office where we managed to freeze a bank account of a radio station and freeze bank account of the station manager and the board chairperson, following a maladministration process that had happened there. So that it was a easy, quick victory for us. But we do not want to get to that point. Clause number 9 of the grant agreement says the following: the MDDA will have unrestricted access to the bank account. But unrestricted access does not necessarily mean that our CEO will remain as a signatory. It means we'll have unrestricted access to the bank account in the event of issues with the grantee, in the event of governance issues, in the event you do not want to report to us, in the event you do not want to give us the bank statements, and in the event we see that you move our funds from the MDDA account to your separate bank account, we may ask for bank statements for that separate bank account, for us to see whether the utilization of those funds are in line with the SOP. Procurement appears on clause number 11. It says the following. It says, for any item that you're going to purchase that is over 2,000 rands in value, you must at least get 3 written quotations. Quotations are then defined there at 11.3. It tells you what is a proper quotation. It must have the name of the service provider, the number of the service provider, the address of the service provider. The item described must be properly described. I've seen one invoice that just said, work done. I was like, but what is work done? Work done means a lot of things. So your quotation must be specific. Generator 34 kWV or whatever those things are. But your quotation must be strictly detailed. And you must make sure that your procurement processes are fair, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective. Fair, transparent, and competitive basically mean the following. If you want to go buy a Coca-Cola 2-liter, it must be that. You can't go to Checkers and go check the price of a Coca-Cola 2-liter, and you go to Pick and Pay, you go and check a Sprite, you go to Spar, you go check a Stony, and you expect to come back with quotations and you're saying those things are fair, transparent, and competitive. When you go to those stores, you're going there looking for one specific item. So, and it must be one specific item, properly described, properly evident on how you're going to do it. Cost effective is in the event that you find that your quotations, Coke in Spar is 10 rands, Coke in Checkers is 12, Coke in whatever, in Woolworths is 13 rands. You can never go for the 13 rands item because that's not being cost effective unless you've got justifying reasons on why you want to go for that. And if you want to deviate from our clause 11.2 that says the procurement policy must be fair, transparent, and competitive and cost effective, you must then write and say, look, I've received these quotations and the reason I'm going with the most expensive one is because of the following. I once read a motivation that said the following. That said, we've got these quotations, but service provider 3 says will give us a maintenance cost for 24 months at 0 rand. So what basically that is doing is that you're going for the most expensive because there is that added quality that you're looking for. Clause number 12 tells you about the acquisition of assets that would have been purchased with the grant funds. The MDDA says the following. It says, all assets purchased with the MDDA funds will belong to the MDDA for the duration of the contract or any extension thereof. What the board has done in the current agreement is that they have added another subclause to say the following, that any disposition, transfer, or donation of the assets should be done with the permission of the MDDA. This protects grantees and colleagues against attachments by sheriffs. It protects the colleagues against creditor notings. It also protects colleagues against landlords. Landlords have this tendency of applying what we call a landlord hypothec. When you owe rental and they want to check you out, they lock you out and they say you can't remove your assets because they have held them under landlord's hypothec. Once that instance happens, you need to refer them to your grant agreement. If they still persist, you then refer the issue to your project coordinator who will then engage with the MDDA. In the past 2 months, I was involved in a litigation issue where we were releasing attached equipment from a sheriff in Kwatwa. That equipment was attached and removed. We only find out at a point where the sheriff was about to go on a sale in execution. The court granted us those equipment. The equipment are back with us. We're about to give it back to the broadcast to the broadcaster. But this is one protection that, colleagues, you're not taking advantage of. In the event where you've got such instances, where you've got such issues, you need to refer them to the MDDA. That's why I say to you, if you find yourself that you're not engaging with your coordinator, your print coordinator, your digital coordinator, or your broadcast coordinator, you are in trouble, because you will not be in a position to transmit information as and when it happens. You wait for the end, when the equipment has been sold, or sheriff has already taken your staff, or what employees usually have got a tendency of doing is that once you've got the grant, they start demanding more money. And what they then do is that they take it to the CCMA, then they get an arbitration award, and they want to use that arbitration award to attach your equipment and sell it. And the grant agreement protects you from such things. And I've noted your hand. Please just let's note. I'm trying to move faster on my slides so that we can take the questions, so that it becomes a very engageful presentation. I've already engaged you about the breach of contract and clauses on how this is managed. I'm just only going to touch on this new thing. It says cancel the grant agreement including persons and entities on the non-compliance register. The current board has approved a non-compliance register and has established a blacklisting appeal committee, which we're in the process of setting up. What this basically means is the following. It's with the MOU that we're busy signing with the Department of Social Development together with the DTI on behalf of the CIPC. What we are doing is that once we terminate your grant agreement based on maladministration, fraud allegations, which would have to confirm, failure to comply with our grant agreement, we'll then place you on the non-compliance register, which differs in levels. So if it's a limited number of, if it's level 1 non-compliance, the only thing you would probably be barred from is you'll not receive your second tranche, your contract may be terminated, and you may probably be required to repay back that portion. If it's level 2 non-compliance, what may happen is the following, is that your contract may be terminated on the outset, repayment it's a given, and then you are barred from applying from the MDDA altogether. So what then happens is that if it's David radio station or David Publishers will then be placed on the non-compliance register. And what we then do is that, because if you have looked at it, what we have currently done is we now have started to request founding members or boards ID copies and their documents. What we then do is that if David Morera was also part of the board, he also goes on the non-compliance register as a person blacklisted by the MDDA. So if an application comes in 2 years with David Morera's name on it, that application automatically becomes rejected. So what we're trying to do with the DSD MOU and the CIPC MOU is so that even if you go and register a company, you try and approach the DSD to try and set up another MPO, a parallel MPO, so that you go and do the same thing elsewhere, they'll be able to say, look, you've been blacklisted at one of our entities, at one of our contracting entities, and you will then be barred from holding office in such an NPO and holding office in such a company. The process is still underway. We're engaging with that. The board has given us a mandate to proceed with that. But colleagues, you can only avoid these things by making sure that you remain compliant with your grant agreement. And how do you remain compliant with your grant agreement? Clause number 6 is very important. Clause number 6 is very important, read with all other clauses, but I can tell you, if you understand how clause number 6 operates, you'll never go wrong in the contract. Because everything is centered around clause number 6. Any other clause or any other supporting clause is there to assist clause number 6. Project management legal tips. This is what I usually advise. As an entity of your nature, there is another added benefit, and I think I could hear during the time the colleague from SARS was presenting on how you can take advantage of certain elements. Our internal unit has been engaging greatly with SARS around making sure that the exemption process becomes very clear. In the last grantee orientation, we're taking an undertaking, which we've also then reverted back to colleagues, around making sure that the Section 18 certificates that you are able to give to supporting organizations that will give you a benefit, you're able to benefit greatly from that. But don't only look at it from that angle. If there's an attorney in your community, you approach them and you say, we're an entity like this, we need you to be able to look at over our legal work. If there's an accountant in your area, we need you to come form part of us for us to be able to manage this part of our operations. What you then also do is that if you've got an internal accounting person who's probably not necessarily qualified in accounting services, because you've got an accountant in your area, you then ask that accountant to say, please do a skills transfer between yourself and our internal person, so that our internal person also gets schooled through this process. You take advantage of the supporting organizations in your area. The other thing is this, colleagues, I'm not sure if you are aware, the MDD has signed an MOU with CEDA on governance advice and company management processes. What you then need to do is that you approach any other CEDA, and based on the MOU, you get assisted. The MDDA is currently in the process, has currently engaged, and I think that the process is also concluded. We're in the process of engaging with telecoms around zero rating website and all those things, which is I think how Ms. Tsikani is currently working on that. She's the new digital coordinator working through that as well. So colleagues, you've got a plethora of information that you can utilize, or services around you that you can utilize to better assist you in managing your organization. What other things that I also give in tips is explain to you how the board operates. I've already taken you through this process. What is the nature of your governance structures? Do you have a community representative on the board, an advisory board, or a technical support type of board? Community representative board, it's a board that encompasses the community. An advisory board is a board that is strictly there to give advice. Technical support, it's one that has come in respect of technical services. So over the period when we do contracting, I usually ask colleagues that I contract with to say, what qualifications do you have? What do you have? And they say, look, I'm here because I've got this background. I'm here because I've got this background, and together we assist each other. What is the process of instituting a board? You are familiar with that, together with how you would have set up your DSD process or your CIPC process. Your constitution will also tell you on how to set up a board and their terms of office. I've seen, or I've been surprised in certain instances where you find a radio station that is probably 15 years old and has had the same board chairperson and the same board members until. I'm still surprised how does that happen, unless you call yourself lifetime board members. However, but that can never be. I mean, there should always be an element of reshuffle so that new ideas come in, technical expertise come in as well. Myriad challenges. I think we all are aware of the poor governance and management the processes that would have happened at our sister entity in the SABC. It's well known. It was well reported. There's always this assumption that community media radio sector is in shambles. It generally plays complete disregard of corporate governance. Station managers are able to dismiss board members, which we still do not know how those things work. Because imagine Ms. Zuki Sopoche dismissing Mr. Tlengani Matebula as the board chairperson and saying you're dismissed. There's this analogy that the station belongs to the station managers, but I'm not here for this. I'm just trying to highlight the challenges that over the period we have come to find in radio stations or in print projects. You find that there's a jack of all trades. This person is the station manager, the finance manager, is the product manager, is the marketing manager, is also the driver, is also a presenter. So all these things, there has to be a separation of roles. That's how you get to have a better understanding of how you run your organization. There are certain things that need to be done at a board level. There has to be proper rotation at board level. And there needs to be the element of accountability needs to be supported at all times. So colleagues, this is one of the things that we have been tasked as well, together with our monitoring and evaluation unit, which is going to be doing this whole process. around checking impact around whether or not our projects are sustainable. If they're not sustainable, then we need to do such workshops like these. The other issue is the following, is that you find that in small commercial media projects, there is this assumption that colleagues in that space do not need to have a board. You can have a board even though you're a P2I Ltd. You have a board of 3 for them to be able to provide you that advisory and that technical support. Because you may be one person, but you need assistance. So what we usually try and do is that we give you these. You need to check the MDDA Act, check the PFMA, check the corporate governance toolkit. If you require assistance on those, you email your project coordinator who gives you access to those tools. In the event they don't have access, they consult internally with the colleagues internally and they get their assistance. One of the things that you need to also understand is the following. Is the functions of the board are different. And like I said, I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm probably engaging with colleagues at the operational level, alternatively conscious of the fact that I'm engaging with people from a dual position. But one of the things that you need to also, as a station manager, or as a publisher, when you've got a board, you need to make sure that your board does not become a stagnant board. Because if you've got a board that is not supportive, that a board that does not work for you, does not work for the station, then you find that there's going to be greater challenges. The only thing that you guys sit and talk about is, where's the money? Where's the money coming? That is a greater challenge in the sector. But you need to have meetings where you're talking about marketing and promotion functions. The board must have a marketing and promotional function. It can never only be the obligation of the station manager to bring in money in the station. There must be a communication function. When people go around the community saying I'm a board member, they must be in a position to provide information to stakeholders, either to the MDDA or to the community, because the community is your biggest stakeholder. And they must be in a position to solicit feedback from the stakeholders, to say, what is it? Are we still relevant? Are we still a relevant radio station? It can never only be a station, an obligation of people on the ground. Particularly on the ground, I'm talking about at operations. But the other issue, which is very critical, the governance function is very important, because a grantee without proper governance structures finds themselves written back, finds themselves with a contract cancelled, finds themselves having to pay back. A number of grantees had to pay back, find themselves having to pay back funds, find themselves on non-compliance registers which are new, and now to add to it, the board has given us an instruction to now start recovering the funds. So no one at this point has been pursued in recovery, but we've now been given that instruction, which will then people will then want to rely on Section 23, subsection 1 of the NPO Act that says, in the event you are doing your work for free, you can never be held liable. But there's always that undertone of whether or not you're doing your work in a proper manner. So colleagues, I have bored you, I think, or I've probably given you information that I hope and assume you needed. I'm open to engage, and later I hope I'm still within time. And thank you very much.
Thanks, David. Colleagues, floor is yours. Questions? David, if you can make me host again so that I can allow colleagues to speak.
Okay.
Please make me host. Sure. Thank you. Okay, Kwebus, your hand is up. Samusi, your hand is up.
Okay, I've got one question. Can I go on?
Yes,
Please go on.
Yeah, David, thank you so much. A very, very interested presentation and absolutely fantastic. I just want to say regarding the fact that I know the mission and the vision of any community radio station is to be consistent. But unfortunately, in the times that we are living in, you know, sometimes there is major challenges for community radio stations, especially when it comes to board members, and especially when it comes to say, for instance, let's talk about board members. The one issue is at board members of a community radio station, and we see it often. And I think the MDDA can also, and even ICASA can collaborate regarding that, where there is unpleasant fraud and things happening with that. Now, my question is, and that's what I say, if you have a board for a community radio station, say for instance, the board that your radio station is operating and managed is a board that is really people who are really doing what they need to do and to stay that. Now, I know according to ICASA, according to the MDDA, you want board members often to change. Now, I don't say that is in every area is a negative thing, but I want to say what is consistent for any community radio station in these days that we are living in is to be a community radio station that is consistent in your programming, consistent in your financial, if I can say, financial needs for the radio station to stay on air for as long as you think you can. So what I just want to say to that, and I agree, there is always room for new things to come to any community radio station. And I believe, as they said, you know, changes in your structure, changes in your community radio station is good. But unfortunately, there is also things, and I think most of the corruption and most of the problems in community radio broadcasting comes from board members. Unfortunately, the reason why I'm saying this, and I'm not saying all the stations, but unfortunately, I've seen and I helped many other community radio stations, and I see how many of these community radio stations funding by the MDDA goes down because of the problems that lies at board members. And David, I wish you can provide me your email address, because I want to write you a letter, because I've got also something that I would like to discuss with you. But just to say to all of us, remember, in the times that we are living, just to have a community radio station sustainable in these days that we are living in is a big challenge, to be honest with you and to any member. And I don't know how many community radio stations is in this presentation, but just to be consistent as a community broadcaster in these times that we are living is a great challenge for every one of us. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Kobus. There was another hand up. Samusi, you had your hand up.
Thank you very much. I just needed clarity there, working with CEDA, just a bit of more information as to how can we utilize the CEDAs. I just heard he mentioned it, but we need more information so that we can see how are we harnessing that opportunities, especially for skills development. Thank you.
Thank you, Samusi. David, there's also a question from Mohau in the Q&A function. MDDA would instruct the grantee to request 3 quotations from 3 different shops and compare them before buying a particular item. In some cases, there would be online stores like Takealot where they would not issue out quotations, but you find that they have lower prices and they provide free transportation compared to the other two shops that are far away and very expensive. In that case, what do we do?
Okay, I think I did not see the Q&A. Okay, hold on, I think I'm seeing it now. All right. I think let me first start by this with this one.
Okay.
I think let's first agree on one. I think Takealot is one. It's a virtual store. We can agree on that. The only difference with Takealot as a virtual store with macro is that macro you physically go to it. With a virtual store you order online and they bring it to you. So the same principle still applies. If you're saying to me that I've compared a camera that at macro is 7 rands, Takealot is 8 rands, and at game is 6 rands. So I'll then also play the analogy in reverse. And you say to me, you want to go to buy it online as opposed to buying it at game, because online they will bring it to you. That is no justification. I would not find that as a justifying reason on why you must go buy an expensive product because you're saying they will bring it to you. But if you're saying to me, on comparison, Takealot is cheaper. Because remember, cost effectiveness does not necessarily go in with convenience. If we're going to talk about convenience, you must rather just buy everything from the store next door because you'll just easily walk next door. So when we're talking convenience, cost effectiveness, we're talking about in pricing. So unless if Mohau, you want to then probably expand further on your question, after I've answered the other two questions, I'll give you an opportunity to let's engage with colleagues. Maybe they can understand it. Maybe I did not read it better. I think the other question was from Semusi around how do you then utilize the CEDAs. Semusi, if you have access, please go to our MDDA intranet. You'll see the MOU concluded with CEDA, and the MOU specifically says the following. It says any MDDA guarantee is able to walk into any CEDA, they call them branches, CEDA branch, and explain the fact that they have been funded by the MDDA. They've got the MDDA has an MOU with CEDA, and then CEDA already knows on how to utilize that. But to properly expand on that, the best person who implements the agreement between the MDDA and CEDA is the person who's leading this workshop, is Mr. Litabo Dibetu. So, but he's the one who's championing the MOU between the MDDA and and CEDA. And what I will then implore you to do is, Litabo's email is here. He's the one who's heading up the CEDA MOU between the MDDA and CEDA. But the MDDA MOU speaks of the following. It speaks about that skills development. It speaks about funding, document submissions, development, and all those things, governance structure, setups. So all those services that they provide, they've also on the side developed as a package, particularly for MDDA grantees. So I think in that, Litabo's email is there, is litabo@mdda.org.za, and he's in a better position to assist. I'm just in the legal unit. I draft these MOUs and I just know how they are written and how they drive into, but there are other colleagues that particularly champion those things on a day-to-day running. And then I think, Kobus, you make mention of quite interesting issues. My email address is dawid@mdda.org.za. I'll also put it in the chat if you want to email me. But I accept that consistency is very important. But imagine, and I like the fact that you're playing on both sides. You're saying consistency is also good when things are running okay. But consistency is also bad
when things are running bad, you know, and there is always an inclusivity requirement from the community. You can't have people that also aspire to sit on the board and contribute. If you have the same board for the number of years, you're basically closing them out to come and participate in the board. But what I've seen with other radio stations, and I think there's a radio station in not in Cape Town, I think it's in Durban next to the airport. What they've done is that when they play this reshuffle process, they create committees that feed into the board. They feed into the board. So some board members will leave the actual board, go into other committees. That's how their constitution is also drafted. The reason why I was talking about how there is a need for movement is because your constitution will say the following. It will say that Kobus, as a board member, can never be a board member more than 3 consecutive years running. But you find that Kobus has been a board member for 8 years. But if you look at what that does is that it creates a problem already, which means what you guys have done are going against your founding documents. So if your constitution, so there's a need for colleagues to go back and look at their founding documents and see if whether the constitution that they've developed is working for them. If you look at your the element around consistency, the issues around how financial management is done from a board level, the issues around oversight, the issues around accountability to the community. If the community eventually finds or is comfortable with a constitution that says, no, we want perpetual board members, and it goes around at every annual general meeting where the community ratifies that constitution as the same, I don't think the MDDA will have an issue with that. But we have an issue with boards that do not want to transform or they do not want to change because against their founding documents.
Yeah.
I
agree with.
All right. I'm not sure if I've because I could pick up that some of the things you were saying were more in commentary, so I do not want to greatly deal with them. But I think I've answered the gist of what you were asking for.
Yeah. No, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. And you were able to pick up my email when I called it out.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other question, Letabo?
Yeah. So I just on the issue of the CEDA MOU, I put a bit of information there in the chat function about the MOU, and then David, regarding Take a Lot, I think the issue was if Take a Lot provides the cheapest price or is the cheapest supply of a particular product, and the MDD requirements are that projects must submit free quotations, how would they then do that, given that there isn't really somebody you can access from Take a Lot to give you a quotation? Would a screenshot of that particular website then suffice as a quotation?
Correct, it will, because this is how you do it. Is you take a screenshot of the item with the pricing, and when you buy on Take a Lot, you open that bin, you add those things. It describes the item, the price for it. It also puts the date on which you are accessing that platform. You print that thing, you compare it with the quotation you have from Macro. Because either way, even when you're going to account through the same platform.
How I see your text, you're saying, and I understood you, Mr. Morana, just to clarify my question. Let's say Take a Lot is cheaper than the other two shops, but the issue is that they do not issue out quotations. Transportation being just an added advantage. So I think, I'm not sure if I've answered you in the screenshot process and all those things. I think you're just trying to say, that
is just an added advantage, but the issue is that they do not have a quotation. That screenshot is sufficient enough for as long as it will have the detail that the contract says it needs to have. So it needs to identify the seller. It will be Take a Lot. It needs to have the date on which the quotation is issued out. It will be the date that appears on that screenshot of yours. It will also need to identify the item. It will be identified. The item would need to be consistent with the other quotations that you would have submitted, those you would have got from Game or Macro or whatever company, or from Rera Pty Ltd. So when you look at the Take a Lot code, the detail must be sufficient enough to be compared together with the quotation that you would have received from the other two shops. All right, I see I've answered your question. I think Jan Otto.
Jan was the same issue, just
Okay,
seeking
yes.
clarity on take a lot.
I'm not sure if he is also sufficiently answered.
Yeah, I would think so.
Okay.
Yeah. Colleagues, any further questions, inputs before
We close. Okay. D, seems like there are no further questions.
All right. If there are no further questions, colleagues, I appreciate you having given me an
To
opportunity
engage with you, but I still implore colleagues, write to us, engage with us if you've got any pressing challenges. The legal unit is very small, but call the office, ask for the legal unit, engage us. If you require advice, we'll give you this advice. If you don't understand any part of the contract, kindly write to us, ask us how do we assist, because we're basically being placed here or set up particularly to assist you in making sure that your operations remain sustainable. We're available for you, or rather I'm speaking for myself, let me rather say I'm available for you. And Letabo, I think I did not give my email address. I don't like giving out my email address because then it becomes a post box, and eventually what colleagues try to do is that they avoid their project coordinators and email me directly. So if I find that an email requires issues that a project coordinator will do, I will still revert it back to the coordinator for them to deal with it. But if it's a legal issue, I will clarify it for you, I will assist you. And one thing I'm trying to plead with you is that if a sheriff walks through your door, wants to touch the broadcast equipment or anything that puts a threat on the broadcast equipment or the equipment that we've funded you, kindly contact us, because we have that mechanism to assist you. As opposed to you utilizing your own budget to go and fight, we can fight for you. In the event you get abused as well, by example, there was a project that was being sued by a municipality where they had publicized an article about fraud and corruption in the area. They were being taken to court, and they'd also followed proper process. And we felt as the MDA that this was proper abuse. We participated in that process to protect the grantee. So we have those added advantages, those added benefits that we can provide to you. And we can provide you these added benefits when you communicate with us. If you don't communicate with us and you only wait for your off air, they've taken your equipment and you want our assistance, that is late. We'll not be in a position to assist. So colleagues, I appreciate you having given me an opportunity to engage with you. Good luck with your implementation. Please keep safe. And I've come to the end of my presentation. Thank you, Letabo.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Raskin.
Oh, yeah. Please share your presentation as well so that we can distribute it to the colleagues. Colleagues, thank you very much for giving us your time and lending us your ears. We really appreciate it. We have, I think you would have seen in the invitation that was sent out by the colleagues from communications at MDDA that we have two other workshops coming up. Tomorrow specifically will focus on corporate governance. It will delve deeper into the King Code, King Code 4, and how that's applicable to NPOs and the community media sector broadly. So please do join us for that one. We'll then also on Thursday have another session on how the POPI Act and the Cyber Crimes Act also impacts on the work that you do. So please do join us for those sessions as well. Earlier I sent an email which had the data claim form. Please do complete that and send it back to us. I'll ask also the colleagues from communication to resend it again. Please, colleagues, please don't forget that when you send your claim form, please also just include a proof of banking letter which if you have a banking app, you can access it there. So please do complete that and send it back to us. Thank you very much, colleagues, for your time. We really appreciate it. We're looking forward to seeing you again tomorrow and Thursday. And also, please don't forget to complete the post attendance survey. I've shared the link, but we'll reshare the link again, just so that the board can see that we are doing our work. We are not sitting on our laurels. Thank you very much, colleagues. As David said, please keep safe and take care. We shall see you tomorrow.